Hello, everybody. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. I'd just like to ask that everyone make sure that they are muted. I'd also like to recommend that people turn off their videos because that can be disruptive for some people's internet access. So make sure you're muted, make sure that your videos have been turned off, and we will get started in just a minute.
Tienes el recibo y todo eso. Era por carta, si quieres carta, pero...
Bueno,
¿Qué
ahorita voy.
pasó?
No, ahorita vengo.
Okay.
All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the Regional Planning Group meeting. This is our first virtual Regional Planning Group meeting, so I appreciate your patience as we transition to this new medium. If you have not already, please sign in on the form available in the GoToMeeting chat. If you are calling in, I will be calling roll, so you will have an opportunity to let me know that you are here. This is going to be a decently long meeting as we have a lot of information to cover, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to ask to make sure that you are muted and that your videos have been turned off. All users have been muted upon entry, but you can unmute yourself at any time if you are participating in the meeting. I advise that everybody turn off their videos as it can be disruptive for some internet access. Again, if you haven't signed in yet, please sign in on the Google form in the chat. You can find this in the chat box. The chat box is in the upper right corner, right there, you should see. If you would like to give a public comment during this meeting, please indicate so on the Google form. The Google form will be live throughout the meeting, so if you do not get a chance to comment now, you can do so at the end of the meeting. I'm going to give just a minute to see if anybody would like to give a public comment. All right, no one has signed up so far. We will just check at the end of the meeting. Let's begin the meeting with roll call. Please unmute yourself and say here once I call your name. Tim Andrus.
Here.
John Byram. Kurt Campbell. Pat Calhoun. Ray Chavez.
Patrick Garcia for Ray Chavez.
Thank you. Alan Cockrell.
Here.
Will Connolly.
Here.
Charlie Flatten.
Here.
Vic Hildebrand. Kevin Yannick.
Here.
Tom Youngman. Russell Labus.
Here.
Glenn Lord.
Present.
Dan Meyer.
Here.
James Dotson for Gary Middleton.
Here.
Jonathan Stinson for Kevin Pattinson.
Here.
Ileana Pena. Robert Puente.
Here.
Humberto Ramos. Steve Ramsey. Weldon Riggs.
Here.
Roland Ruiz.
Here.
Diane Savage. Suzanne Scott.
Here.
Greg Singelman.
Here.
Mitchell Sowards.
Here.
Heather Sumter. Thomas Taggart.
Here.
Ryan Kelso for Ian Taylor.
Here.
Diane Wassenich.
Here.
And Adam Lebongski.
Here.
All right, moving on to non-voting members. Elizabeth McCoy.
Here.
Ronald Feisler. Ileana Delgado.
Here.
Don McGee. Marty Kelly.
Here.
Joseph McDaniel. Jamie McCool. Carl Kroll. And Rusty Ray.
Here.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to ask that you go ahead and remute yourselves. Moving on to public comments. I'm going to check to see if anybody has signed up. We have received no sign up for public comment, so there is no public comment. Once again, you will have an opportunity at the end of the meeting. If you would still like to give a public comment, you can sign up on the Google form provided in the chat and indicate that you would like to give a public comment. All right, approval of the minutes.
You want me to talk through that, Caitlin, or do you want to do that?
Yes, please, Susan.
I'm sorry?
Please go ahead.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our meeting. I know this is a little unusual to have our regional meetings in this way, but we are very happy that we're able to get this work done, and so pleased that y'all were able to join us. First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the February the 20th regional meeting. Are there any edits or suggested corrections to the minutes?
They look good to me, and this is Diane, and I move that we accept them.
Thank you,
Glenn-
Diane.
Glenn Lord, second.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. For the purposes of this meeting, we will just ask if you have any objection to the approval of the minutes. Please either signify by unmuting yourself and letting us know, or put it in the chat that you have a concern. Otherwise, we're going to assume that they're approved. So we'll give a minute. Anybody have any objections? All right, hearing none, the minutes are approved. Next on the agenda, we are so honored today that we have Water Development Board Director Kathleen Jackson with us again today. As you know, she has been very engaged in the regional water planning effort. She's such a leader in the state on water issues and has made herself so available to many of us as we go through these water issues throughout the state. And we are so honored that she's with us today. So Kathleen, I give the floor to you, and again, express our gratitude to you for your leadership in the state and through the Water Development Board.
Well, Suzanne, thank you so much. Of course, the real heroes are the folks that are on the call today or on the virtual presentation. It's great to be here and kind of have the opportunity to visit and to see everyone virtually. Just wanted to say thank you for all the work that you're doing throughout these challenging times, kind of keeping the water flowing, but taking those important meetings that you're taking and continuing to work with regional water planning, getting the data and the science so that as we move forward, we'll make sure that communities across Texas have the water that they need. And of course, in Region L, it's a fast-growing part of the state. I mean, so much to offer, and so fortunate that we have the leadership that we do that are not only doing the regional water plan, which kind of rolls up into the state water plan, but also the hard work that you're doing to kind of take and turn the planning into projects. So I think we're continuing to make great progress across Texas. The folks that we talk with, the construction projects continue to move forward. It is a little bit different time at the Water Development Board. We have a lot of our staff that are working from home. We have instituted some policies in the office so that, from time to time, the folks that need to go in and take care of some work, if they feel safe and are able to do that, are doing so. We've kind of made the transition, if you will, particularly in our accounting, to move from kind of paper to something that is more online. And so in a lot of ways, I mean, when you look at it, it's almost been a seamless transition, which I think is a credit to our staff and also to the folks, who are out there and that we deal with every day. So you're all making a tremendous effort, and it's a huge credit, I think, to the water community that we're moving projects forward and that we're taking time to continue to do the planning, because again, that's the key to our success. If we just recently from our last board meeting approved the next round of SWIFT projects, some really exciting major water supply projects that are moving forward. And of course, we know that it's not one big answer, it's a lot of little answers. And certainly, we've got signature projects in Region L that are moving forward, and that kind of, really kind of send the message that if you're doing business in Texas, if you want to live in Texas, you don't have to worry about your water supply. We've got folks who are working hard and are making sure that not only do we have the water that we need today, but we'll have the water for the future. Moving forward with flood, and just a real quick update there. Of course, we've been busy seeking nominations for our very first flood planning regional groups. As you know, that's patterned after the successful work that has been done over the years in regional water planning. We've received over 280 applications for those initial flood infrastructure projects. So the staff is moving through those applications. We're reviewing the nominations, and so that whole process continues to move forward. So, hopefully on down the road, we'll have, if you will, that 1-2 punch. We'll have, the water supply that people need, and then we'll also be doing our first ever state flood plan, and then providing the resources to help communities across our state mitigate flood. So again, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for the work that you're doing in Region L. And thanks to each and every one of you for what you're doing each and every day to make sure that, whether it's a big city or whether it's a small community, that people have the water that they need. So Suzanne, thanks for your leadership. Thanks for the great work that y'all are doing in Region L. And, anything and everything that we can do, please reach out to us. We would, love to hear from you. We're all about continuous improvement, so thoughts and ideas, how we can, continue to do our job better. We'd like to know that. If we're our resource, as you know, we're not regulatory, so anything that we can do to help, please just reach out for us. And again, just thanks for all the work that y'all are doing, and excited to be a part of the meeting today and to kind of hear all the progress that you're making.
Well, thank you, Kathleen. We really appreciate your leadership and your ability to be here today and join our group. I do have to say that and share compliments for the Water Development Board staff and their availability through all of this. I mean, the timing of this situation couldn't be worse as it relates to trying to finalize a state water or regional water plan to feed up into the state water planning process and to meet the deadlines that are established. And I can tell you that your staff has continued to make themselves available to help us work through the comments and the other issues, of course, that we're going to be talking about today. Similarly, the group I'm also participating in the Interregional Planning Council that has been formed, and the Water Development Board staff has just done an incredible job supporting that process too. Again, on a pretty short time frame for that. And they have been very accommodating. So I just wanted to say, I know they're all working remotely and trying to do the best they can, but from my perspective, they've been very responsive, and I appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Suzanne. We're proud of them too.
So next item on the agenda is a status report on the Edwards Aquifer Habitat Conservation Plan from Scott.
Thank you, Suzanne. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with Regional Work Group. I wanted to just give you a quick update on where things stand with the HCP here in the region. First of all, we have been very busy. We've continued our activities. We're working virtually for the past, since March 14th. We've had a number of implementing committee and stakeholder committee meetings, working on from a web-based approach using Teams. So we're in the same status as you all as far as trying to facilitate progress and information sharing and making decisions related to our mission. And that's continued and done. We've developed a very smooth process, and I think that it will continue to go well as we move into the fall and continue this virtual platform that we're working from. First of all, the primary thing I'd like to mention is that we've been working on what we're calling a permit options analysis report. And this permit and options analysis report is done with ICF Consulting. ICF is a nationally known consulting group that works specifically in the habitat conservation plan space. They're a premier leader in this area. They're working in at least 25 to 30 states right now, working on 50 to 60 different HCPs and different variety of different roles. And what we hired them to do is to help us look at when we call it a permit options renewal process. We have a permit that for our incidental take permit, which will end in 2028. It started in 2013. The incidental take permittees are the City of San Antonio through SAWS, the City of San Marcos, the City of New Braunfels, Texas State University, and then the EAA. And those 5 permittees are intended to be the also as a non-voting member, we have the GBRA as well. But the voting members, as far as the permittees, are the 5 I mentioned. And those 5 permittees we have to determine what are the paths we will take forward. And so the paths you can equate to an option. And the paths forward range from looking at, there's 5 paths that have been identified by ICF Consulting, and they range from totally doing away with the HCP and just letting it fade into the dust, or all to another extreme on the other end of the spectrum, allowing the permit to become a new permit and totally renew and redo the permit. Which would be a very radical and a very expensive and very involved process, which would take multiples of years. So those, we're trying to close out this permit as well as anticipate what the next permit might look like. And, the next permit might look like something that would be on a longer scale in 15 years. Hopefully a 20 to 30-year permit would be something that would be anticipated by the stakeholder committee and by the implementing committee as we move towards those timelines. We're starting early, and the reason why we're starting early is because this is a process that takes a lot of time to work through with a lot of stakeholders, a lot of stakeholder input, a lot of regional input, a lot of guidance from a lot of expertise in such consultants such as ICF, as well as determining what are the priorities and what do we need to be looking for as we move into the next generation of protecting the species and the habitat in the springs, as well as continuing to guarantee that we have adequate recharge and water flow in the aquifer as far as from a pumping standpoint. So this is where we're standing on this analysis. This analysis will complete at the end of September. And then at that point, I'll be able to share a little more at our next quarterly meeting, where I can give you a little more of an update, maybe a little bit more flavor of what their analysis actually came up with. And that way you might have more detailed insight to what we're trying to accomplish with this consulting contract. Besides that, that's our primary activity that we've been undertaking through the summer. And, that's, I think at this stage, that's what I'd like to share. And if there are any questions or anything I can help answer for you, Suzanne, please let me know.
All right, thank you. Any questions of Scott? All right, thank you so much. Appreciate that update. Next thing on the agenda is the status on the BBASC work and the BBEST work. I think back last month, I sort of gave you an update on some of the funding decisions that had been made relative to some of the studies that had been funded for this biennium. The one thing I did want to just mention quickly today is the Water Development Board. One of the studies that was funded is it's called the Statewide Synthesis of Environmental Flows Studies. And this is something that the Water Development Board is putting together and has scoped to kind of look at all the various studies that have been done up to this point and been funded through the state, and kind of figuring out exactly, how they all link together. Are they helping to answer some of the questions relative to the standards that had been previously set, and as we're coming up on the 10-year anniversary of some of those standards, is the information that we're gathering and the science that we're putting together, is it going to be helpful in informing the state on those various standards that have been, environmental flow standards that have been set. So we had a brief kind of status meeting this week on July the 27th. And the study sponsors and conductors of that kind of gave us an update. That's Tom Hardy, I believe, yeah, that's right. Gave us a update on everything, and there's no response at this point. They were really just giving us a status on kind of their process, kind of the questions, the evaluation that they're doing so far relative to the studies that have been conducted. And we should get more information later in the process. There will potentially be, it's going to be on a pretty tight time frame. Once the report does come out, I think that there's going to be a very short window in the fall, I think in the November time frame, for us to be able to comment on the response to this study effort. So I would imagine that I was just talking to my staff about potentially trying to get together a meeting of the BBASC sometime in that short window, that we could provide some feedback on the results of that study. So just that will be here in the fall, that we'll try to bring people together. I know that Diane was also on that call. I didn't know, Diane, if you wanted to add anything to this brief report.
No, not really, but I was very interested to find out about this study, especially in light of the fact that our study about a model that would have used a lot of the data we've connected for our basin was turned down and not done. So it seemed to me that this meeting with Dr. Hardy and the analysis he's doing was looking for exactly, or at least trying to identify exactly the kind of studies that ended up getting turned down that we were trying to do. So, of course, I'm waiting for the report with bated breath and looking forward to a BBASC meeting to discuss.
Yes, I had the same observation. It was kind of interesting. But in any case, I mean, I think that we're trying to get the information. I think the state is trying to understand how all of this information is going to be informative as we move forward. And honestly, many of us that have been involved in this process, you know, are interested as well. So it'll be interesting on that study. And a lot of the, you know, the people that we're very familiar with are engaged as part of that study team. So it will be interesting, and we'll keep you updated through our regular reports to this group. Any questions from anybody on that? All right, if not hearing any, we will now move into the Water Development Board communications. Elizabeth.
Hi, good morning. This is Elizabeth McCoy at the board. It has been a while since the last meeting, so I do have a few items to provide updates on. And I'll start with an update on the regional water planning rulemaking. The Chapter 357 planning rules have been revised to incorporate the new requirements from House Bill 807, which passed during the last legislative session. The revised rules have been adopted and became effective on June the 28th. The updated rules are available on the Secretary of State's website, and our staff are working on updating the electronic rules pamphlet, and we should have that available soon. The Water Development Board has also issued comments on the initially prepared plans. The final regional water plans will need to include a copy of these TWDB comments and the region's responses. And as a reminder, the final plans, as well as the project prioritization list, are due on October 14th. And both items will need to be approved at a regular planning group meeting. We're starting to look ahead to the next planning cycle. The request for applications for the 6th cycle planning grant funds will be issued next spring, and I'll have some more information to provide on this process later in the year. But before applying for the 6th round funds next spring, the planning groups will need to take action to select their political subdivision for the 6th cycle and authorize them to submit an application prior to the RFA deadline. The Interregional Planning Council, which was established by House Bill 807, has held 6 virtual meetings over the past few months. The council has broken into committees to work on several topics, which include best practices for future planning, enhancing interregional coordination, and planning water resources for the state as a whole. A report on the council's work is due to the board in October. Next slide, please. Thank you. As Director Jackson mentioned, at the July 23rd board meeting, SWIFT funds were committed to finance several projects, and this includes 2 projects in Region L, the GBRA Mid-Basin Water Supply Project, and the Alliance Regional Water Authority Carrizo-Wilcox Project Phase 1B. Both of these projects were recommended in the 2016 Region L Regional Water Plan. And then finally, I'd like to give a brief update on the Regional Flood Planning Program. The flood planning boundaries have been established and rules have been adopted. The board has been soliciting nominations for the initial Regional Flood Planning Group membership, and the initial nomination period closed on July 17th, but the board is still accepting some targeted nominations for certain interest categories. A solicitation is also open seeking interest from potential political subdivision sponsors for the regions, and that solicitation closes on August 21st. You can find more information on the flood program and the open solicitation on our website. There's a link on the screen. It's twdb.texas.gov/flood. And that's all I have. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Appreciate the update. The next item on the agenda is the chair's report, and I will just tag on to what Elizabeth was saying regarding the Interregional Planning Council. I have been selected to chair that group. So we, myself, I serve as chair, and then Kelly Holcomb is the vice chair of that group. And as Elizabeth mentioned, we have split the council into subcommittees to deal with the 3 topic areas that were outlined in the legislation: planning for water resources for the state as a whole, ways to enhance interregional coordination, and best practices for the future of planning. We also, as requested by Chairman Larson, he asked if we could spend a little bit of time as the council potentially looking at interregional conflict and maybe ways to identify how conflict could be addressed and resolved through future planning. So we are also looking at interregional conflict. There is not a lot of conflict, fortunately, between regional water plans, but there have been some between C and D that have been around for a while, but there are opportunities potentially that conflict could arise in the future. So this is an concept of trying to look at ways to potentially identify and mitigate that sooner rather than later. So this group, as Elizabeth mentioned, has been meeting quite a bit. We have a lot of work to do between now and this report due in October. The next meeting of this Interregional Planning Council is on August the 12th. I would encourage any of you that are interested in what's going on with this committee, because it is working pretty quickly, and we're doing all of our meetings, both the larger council meetings and the committee meetings, all virtually. So you can go onto the Water Development Board's website. There's a website for all of the meetings, the materials, the deliberations of this process through the, again, look for the Interregional Planning Council. All the meetings are posted and open. Do have the opportunity for public comment as it relates to the works of these committees. So if you're interested, I would encourage you to go to the website and look up the information. And we will be giving another report on this at the next Regional meeting as to the progress. But a lot of good work and a lot of good ideas are coming through that process. And I think it will have a meaningful result as it relates to guidance to the Water Development Board and the legislature and others about some potential opportunities for looking for improvements possibly to the process, or maybe things that we would want to look at going forward. So any questions about the work of the Interregional Planning Council? All right, thank you very much. Next, we're going to move into the discussion and appropriate action regarding the consultant's work and schedule. So we have a long agenda, so we have a lot of work to get through today. Thank you. I guess Lauren will take it over from here.
Good morning. Let me share my screen. Can you all see that okay? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. So I'm Lauren Gonzalez from our consultant team. Today we have Junior Legate and Katie Snyder with Black and Beach. Since we're going to be discussing proposed language regarding One Water, I've invited one of our Black and Beach's experts on reuse in One Water, Joanne Jackson. And with this virtual meeting, we have an opportunity to bring some of our national experts and to lend their knowledge and bring them into the loop here. From Daniel B. Stevens, we have Stephanie Moore, and from SWCA, we have Christine Westerman. And from Jimenez and Associates, we have Linda Jimenez. So let's jump right in. We have a lot to cover today. First off, I'm not showing it on the screen, but Caitlin emailed a list of active projects within the regional area that the consultant team is currently contracted to perform. There are a few updates since our meeting in February. We have a few new projects that were added, and they're indicated in the rightmost column. Are there any questions on that? Okay, then I will move on. The anticipated schedule. This is mainly a review of where we've been and the various tasks that are ongoing. Since we're nearing the end of the project, the ongoing phases are related to public participation and the prioritization, which we'll be discussing later on today. And by public participation, it's also the plan adoption. And so this all culminates in our next meeting on September 3rd to adopt the plan and the prioritization and submittal of the final plan by October 14th. This is another way of looking at that schedule. This was provided by the Texas Water Development Board. We've looked at this a few times. And this schedule really helps us to understand the various public comment periods. So again, if we're looking at the far left of the screen, top left, we have that we adopted the IPP and submitted it to the Texas Water Development Board on February 20th, submitted March 3rd. We had a variety of RWPG IPP hearings on May 7th and the 21st and the 28th. And those IPP hearings kicked off a series of public comment periods. The first is the 60-day public comment period, which ended on July 20th. And then there's the 90-day federal and state agency comment period, and that ends on August 19th. So there is a possibility that we could receive some additional comments from federal and state agencies. At this point, we've received 2 comments from state agencies, which we'll talk about later in this presentation. And then this brings us to today, July 30th. We're considering and addressing all of the comments. And then we'll move on to adopting the final plan on September 3rd and also approving that prioritization, as Elizabeth McCoy mentioned, and submitting both of those by October 14th. So while it might look like we have a lot of time available between today and when we adopt the final plan, it's really just a little more than a month, right? So this breaks down the steps where we're needing to take in order to get us from today to the submittal of the prioritization in the regional water plan. So say it's July 30th, this is where you'll be providing us direction on comments. And then our plan is to, based on that direction, revise the chapters and DB22 and so forth. We will provide revised chapters for the entire plan to the RWPG members by August 17th. These chapters will be in the form of PDFs that will show in red line strikeout where the changes have been made, so you can see exactly what's new. And that will be applicable to the chapters that are Microsoft Word based, which is most of them. The tables though, if we've got a table like, let's say Appendix 3-B, which is the surface water reliability, that won't be in track changes. So just wanted to give you an update on that. So we'll provide all of that information to you all on August 17th, and then we'll provide 1 week to get us comments on this final draft. And then if there are some changes that need to be made, then we can bring that forward. Hopefully there won't be. And then we can adopt this, the regional water plan on September 3rd. At this September 3rd meeting is also when we will review the final prioritization and get your approval on that. And then we will submit the regional water plan and prioritization to the Texas Water Development Board on October 14th. Are there any questions on that? Hearing none, I'm going to move forward. We're going to kind of zoom in a little bit on how exactly we're going to provide this information, the revised chapters, to the RWPG members for your review and comment. And I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin to provide a review of how to provide those comments and on the Google Drive.
Hello, everybody. This is basically exactly what we did before for submitting comments on the chapters of the IPP. I'll be sending out this PDF again to everybody. Essentially, you just log into Google, you go to Google Drive, you type in this email and password that are specific to Regional. If Google asks you to verify your account, which has done for some of you all in the past, all you need to do is put in my River Authority email and it will let you through. Next slide, please. Thank you. In the regional Google Drive, all you need to do is go click on this yellow folder. It says a regional water plan. Each volume will have its own folder. Inside of the folder, you will see PDFs of all of the chapters, just as before. And there will be one Google form for that whole volume. All you will need to do is put the name of the chapter and the name of the section and then your comment. If you do not want to use this method, I will be sending out all the PDFs of the documents through email anyways. You can send your comments directly back to me and I will put them into the form for Lauren. Are there any questions on this? Okay, can we go to the last slide, Lauren? All right. This is really important, how to comment on the Google form. Once you get to the form, you need to click this top right corner. It's the little I. If you do not click that, you will end up changing the form, and then it will be all different for everybody else who comes to access it. So it's really important to click that I. Once again, include the chapter and the section number for each comment, and then hit submit. No questions? All right, we can move on. Thanks, Lauren.
Okay. The next item is the presentation of the regional budget current status.
Sorry about that, I was on mute. As mentioned, we're nearing the end of this 5-year project. We are currently at budget for this effort, and we're working diligently to finish the tasks, and we'll finish them regardless of whether or not we go over budget. So you don't need to have any concerns about that. Based on the discussion today, we'll be working over the next 2.5 months to get this work completed. We pulled together these numbers and in the process of finalizing the invoice. And we're working to QC this now. Are there any questions about this?
Any questions on the budget that you have in front of you here regarding, looks like they're just about, like as she said, on budget. Any questions, comments? All right, moving on to then the next item is discussion and appropriate action regarding comments received to date on the 2021 regional IPP. Now, I know that the packet was sent out and there's a lot of information here, so we're going to go through this and try to make it through all of the various comments that have been received and hopefully get some direction for Lauren so she can finalize. Lauren?
Thanks, Suzanne. So let's start off with the general categories of comments that we've received. So we've received comments from the public, comments from state and federal agencies, and comments from the Texas Water Development Board. And I understand that Texas Water Development Board is a state agency. This is more like comments from other state and federal agencies. And if you look in your agenda packet, we have included handouts of all of the comments that we've received to date. So I'm trying to, if you were to look at this, I've got them bookmarked also, so you can see the presentation that we're going to give, and then the handouts. And so it's broken out. This is a draft, an idea of a draft of how we could show the public comments. And this would be comments from the public and also comments from the state and federal agencies. So it includes the comment that we've received from the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department and the State Soil and Water Conservation Board and so forth. So then we also have the comments received from the Texas Water Development Board, as a handout. And we've got the comments over here in the far left columns, and then we've got our proposed responses over here in the right column. And currently, the way that this is all worded, it's worded in the future tense, but what will actually end up going to being incorporated into the final plan and actually being submitted to the Texas Water Development Board, it will be in past tense. So instead of saying like information will be provided, it'll say this information was provided or this information was revised in chapter 5.2.28 and so forth. So let's start first with the comments from the public. So we received 4 comments from the public. 2 were verbal during the public hearings and 2 were written. In terms of from kind of breaking that down, we have 1 from as an actual member of just the public and didn't represent a particular organization. We received 2 comments from a representative of the Sierra Club and 1 comment from a representative of McCoy WSC. So we are tasked with summarizing the public comments and other state agencies' comments and then addressing them. The level of detail and the level of response that's required is a little murky and it's not very prescriptive from the Texas Water Development Board of how much detail we actually need to go in and address particular portions of somebody's comment, because a lot of these comments were multi-pages, multi-paragraphs long. So we're required to summarize them and address them. And so we can summarize them however you see fit, and we can respond to them in a way that you agree to. So this was my first stab at summarizing the various comments that we received. So we've got 9 slides of summaries of the comments that we received from the public. So starting off, I've categorized them by population. So we had some individuals state that the population projections are overestimated. Others said that they were too conservative, and others, another comment asked that margins of error be included. And so the proposed response is located here, and it could be as simple as like this comment is acknowledged, or it could be the 2021 Regional Water Plan is an update of the 2016 Regional Water Plan. The emphasis of the population and demand projections in the 2021 Regional Water Plan is transition the 2017 State Water Plan data from political boundaries to utility service area boundaries, making limited modifications based on relevant change conditions. And then with regard to the margins of error, we could just say, Texas Water Development Board provides those population projections to the RWPGs. Do you have any direction on how you might want to see this being revised?
Are there any comments regarding this? I mean, it's the population projections are pretty prescribed to us. The only thing, Lauren, is I do think that we dealt with a little bit of those entities that had some concerns about population. I mean, the process allows for entities that have concerns to express those, and then they can, if there were issues or whatever, those ultimately could be taken up to the Water Development Board, right? I mean, the rules allow for there to be some input, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Some people took advantage of those, I guess, is the point I'm trying to make.
Yes. The Texas Water Development Board has methodology for requesting revisions to the population, and I believe generally with this cycle, if you requested an increase in population for your particular utility, it would require a decrease for another utility within the same county. And that that was mainly because this is an update of the 2016 Regional Water Plan. It's based on 2010 census data, and also the Texas Water Development Board was really wanting to minimize the modifications and any changes that would be made, because they wanted to be able to transition the population and water demand projections from, you know, the political boundary to utility service area boundaries.
Sure.
And I talk a little bit more about that in a later, on, I think it's slide 9 of 9, because we ended up getting a comment from McCoy WSC that was requesting for revisions to be made. So if it would be helpful, I can go to that one.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that maybe it would be something that would say that not only does the Water Development Board provide population projections, but they also have a prescribed process by which any modifications could be brought forward. So in other words, it's a little bit out of the regional water planning group's ability to modify the populations. It's pretty prescribed. And I think that would be important to state in response to the public comment.
Right.
Okay.
I'll just go back to this one then. Okay, well, I can update this proposed response to just expound on that a little bit more, if you would like. Anything else? Okay.
I don't think so.
Going on to slide 2 of 9.
I'm sorry.
So one of the comments. Oh, go ahead.
Lauren, what, back to that first section, when you use the term political boundaries, does that imply strictly based on the boundaries like counties, or, you know, is that what that means? Is that, or am I?
Think of it more in terms of cities. So
Okay.
I'll use maybe the example of San Antonio. The population and water demand projections used to be based on the actual city limits of San Antonio. And now they've moved it from the population or the actual city limits of San Antonio to the utility service area boundaries of SAWS, San Antonio Water System.
Okay, thank you.
It enabled the utilities to better estimate and provide comments on population and water demand.
That makes sense. Thank you, Lauren.
You're welcome. The comment for water demands is that the non-municipal water demands are stable throughout 2070, but climate change would pressure significant changes, and it should be taken into account. There was also, I kind of lumped these two comments together, because there was another comment about how climate change and recent available models that depict the climate change impacts should be considered in the water supply and availability evaluations. And so as I had presented this to the staff work group 2 weeks ago and received some feedback that perhaps we could add a new policy recommendation into Chapter 8 that would request the Texas Water Development Board to reassess available climate models and consider the appropriateness of actually incorporating climate change or those effects into regional water planning. And I should stress that this is just a proposed response, and we can wordsmith this and we can revise it right now if you want. And or we could scrap the whole thing. So this is direction requested from the Regional Water Planning Group and how you want to proceed.
This is Suzanne again. Just to give the group some feedback on this. I mean, this is how we felt from the staff work group, that we could at least note it in Chapter 8, which deals with policy recommendations. I mean, honestly, the process doesn't really provide a whole lot of opportunity to look at climate variability, other than, you know, through everything is sort of looked about kind of past, related to what has happened in the past, drought of record, the WAM models, all of that. Doesn't really project moving forward. And I think that there has been some highly publicized articles and studies from the state climatologist regarding climate change, climate variability. And there's really not guidance for us related to how to incorporate that to any great extent within the planning process. So that's why we suggested that maybe some direction, whether it's from the Water Development Board or the legislature or somebody, to just sort of say, how should we be dealing with this as it looks at those, looking further out, and how to involve this in some of our planning, because most of our models are really looking on what has occurred, not necessarily on what could occur, if that makes sense. Any concerns about having just a note in the chapter 8 regarding this?
This is Diane. I would say that it's really quite carefully worded, and it makes sense for us to include this. And so I think y'all did a great job.
Thank you.
Any other concerns or comments about that? At least we're raising the issue and being responsive to the public comment that was received.
Okay.
Not hearing anything.
This is Suzanne. This is Tom Taggart.
Yes.
I think the only comment I would make in relation to the legislative recommendation as none, would it be appropriate that if the Water Development Board did reassess this and determine that there was a legislative guidance needed, that it would be reasonable to put in the recommendation, as determined by Texas Water Development Board?
That's
or is that not an appropriate role for them?
Well, I mean, particularly if there's additional funding that's needed or other things like that that would relate to getting some of this information.
That's what I was thinking, for studies or,
So your recommendation, your suggestion would be, instead of none, we could put pending.
As recommended by TWDB.
Okay, sure. Anybody have a concern about that? Okay. All right. I think we can move on then. Thank y'all.
Okay. Okay. The next one is about water conservation. One of the comments is that per capita water use goals are currently shown are inadequate, and that 70 to 100 gallons per capita per day is achievable. There were a variety of comments that were included in that in this particular individual's comments that I essentially summarized into that one statement. But over here, we've got these proposed responses that we could add. So the first would be just a general statement that Region L recognizes the importance of water conservation and will continue to emphasize the importance of conservation to reduce water use. And the South Central Regional Water Planning Group has incorporated recommendations from the Water Conservation Advisory Council, which recommends a goal of 140 gallons per capita per day or less. Water user groups may choose to incorporate utility-specific goals beyond those identified by the South Central Texas Regional Water Planning Group. And in fact, SAWS has done just that. And so I would also propose to add a clarifying statement added to the Advanced Water Conservation Water Management Strategy, because the water strategy itself it's quite confusing, because the Texas Water Development Board has requested that what we show as a utilities GPCD is the baseline GPCD based on water use and then applying the passive water conservation associated with fixtures, like low flow fixtures. And so that's presented as the utilities water use in terms of gallons per capita per day. And then what would the GPCD be once the advanced water conservation water management strategy is actually applied? Because the water management strategy is focused on reducing the GPCD on a percentage basis based on whether or not that utility is actually meeting the 140 gallons per day. And so,
Lauren,
go ahead.
this is Patrick. I just want to make a comment that SAWS didn't get to achieve this 110 gallons per day, as mentioned here, we didn't get there overnight. I want to say I spent 13 years on the Water Conservation Committee, and every bit of 13 years of hard work from a group of folks in the community that actually had enough ambition to stick together that long to make all these changes to get to where we are. So I think it's important to note and maybe have a thought on this with the group here, that when you talk about water conservation, it does not happen overnight. So obviously the question, that 70 to 100 gallons is achievable is certainly not something that will happen immediately. And I would cite, San Antonio's long history of where it took us, how long it took us to get there. Just a comment.
Sure. And I haven't gotten to that point yet, but I do want to circle back around to the 110 GPCD, because that's actually incorrect. That because SAWS is actually achieving a water use GPCD that is much lower than that, and it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 GPCD once you apply all of the different water conservation, water management strategies. And so, as I was mentioning earlier, the advanced water conservation, water management strategy, it presents the GPCDs just using passive conservation. And so that's just limited to low flow fixtures. But then once additional advanced water conservation, water management strategy efforts are applied to that, then the GPCD is lowered even further, because the Texas Water Development Board wants to show the credit, essentially, that utilities can get from having that reduced GPCD even lower. And so I think that the comment about SAWS, it was included in a table where it shouldn't have been, because SAWS actually has their own utility-specific GPCD goals, and they have their own table that's farther down that didn't include their GPCD at all. But it should have been there. And so we're proposing to correct that summary and include SAWS's GPCD with the advanced water conservation, and then also breaking that out even further, because SAWS essentially has two different water management strategy projects under the advanced water conservation water management strategy umbrella. And those two are just generally the advanced water conservation, like municipal conservation, and then the other one is the advanced meter infrastructure project. And so in terms of addressing the comment, we want to just say that the 110 GPCD for SAWS is not correct. It will be corrected in the final plan, and it will break it out even further and describe what the actual savings would be for SAWS as a result of municipal conservation in general and as a result of this advanced meter infrastructure project. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you for that explanation.
You're welcome.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody have any proposed revisions or comments or additions?
Not hearing any. So let's continue to move on.
In terms of water conservation, it says here that commercial and non-municipal water conservation reductions should be included. The Advanced Water Conservation Water Management Strategy recommends that all water user groups, regardless of the use type, so commercial, irrigation, and so forth, that all what the strategy recommends that all of those water user groups implement water conservation measures. But in terms of the actual recommended strategies that would go into DB22 and so forth, it's really just limited to the municipal conservation folks. So the proposed response here is Regional recognizes the importance of water conservation as a primary water management strategy and recommends that every WUG implement water conservation measures. Does anybody have any revisions, additions?
Any comments on that? Okay, continue.
Drought management. The South Central Texas Regional Water Planning Group should use more than the 5% reduction in demand. So the drought management water management strategy is meant to be a short-term reduction in demand as a result of activating drought contingency plans, or DCPs. So this water management strategy was applied to WUGs that have needs in the 2020 decade. The South Central Texas Regional Water Planning Group and the water management strategy includes reductions at 5%, 15%, 10%, 5, 10, 15, and 20%. And at the November meeting, the RWPG ultimately chose the 5% as the demand reduction standard for most of the WUGs, mainly because the total annual costs associated with greater reductions are significantly greater. So WUGs have, similar to the Advanced Water Conservation Water Management Strategy, WUGs have the choice to implement utility-specific reduction goals beyond the 5%. And so, for example, SAWS has chosen to do that. And so this is what the proposed comment would be with regards to drought management. Thoughts or ideas? Okay. In terms of the cumulative effects evaluation, the comment received was that the environmental concerns need more detailed analysis and mitigation. Do we have a proposed response to that?
I thought what we had discussed is that we went, we did follow the guidance through the rulemaking. Is that?
We did meet the requirements of the rulemaking in terms of the cumulative effects.
Mm-hmm. I guess without more specifics as to what type of detail would be requested. I mean, we've always stated that it would be nice to be able to do, more, but I think that, we, as a planning group, I think came up with, and if Steven Siebert is on this call, he can refresh my memory, but we did go through a guiding principle as to kind of our, the assessment that we were going to do, if I recall, and kind of use that as a guiding principle in this, I believe. Is that right, Stephen? I don't have my guiding principle in front of me, but I think we did have some guidance on that.
There is, and we made sure that the chapter responds to all of those bullet points in the guiding principle.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think maybe you could, what you could do is state that add that a little bit, that there was a guiding principle process that we went through as a committee early on to guide the process that we were going to use, and the group did follow that.
Chair Scott, this is Stephen. You
Yes.
are referring to the environmental assessments?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we did move up we do have a guiding principle as you referenced, and we did move up the environmental assessment earlier into the planning process. It was historically taking place at the end of the planning process, and to make it a more realistic and more impactful to the water management strategies, the planning group paired it with the water management strategy process and synced those two up. So it occurred much sooner in the planning cycle.
Yeah, this is Christine Westerman. I was just going to add that really where more of the detailed information on the environmental analysis is for the individual water management strategies.
That's a good point. So maybe we could highlight that in your response. Is we had the guiding principle, we did a lot more of that with individual strategies, and then the cumulative effects evaluation, sort of took some of that into consideration, but really followed the rules that are outlined by the Water Development Board. Is that a good sort of summary of the steps that we've taken?
Perfect. Yes, we can do that.
All right. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you. Moving on to the summarized comment about innovative strategies. We received a comment that Regional should consider net zero water and consider policies to encourage and incentivize enhanced reuse. And I just provided a little background here about what net zero water is. And net zero water is limiting consumption of water resources and returning it back to the same watershed so as not to deplete resources of that region in quantity or quality over the course of the year. And one water is also is similar in nature, and it is a reuse-based approach that views drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, and more as a singular resource to be managed holistically and sustainably. It's more of a system-wide approach. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, we have Joanne Jackson on the line here, and she could, if Joanne, if you wanted to jump in and provide any other additional information on this, feel free.
Hi, this is Joanne Jackson. Just a lot of times you hear of the net zero water being down at the like a building level of a building that reuses all the water. With you maybe collect rainwater, use their wastewater for toilet flushing, even maybe treat their wastewater to drinking water. And so it's usually on a smaller scale, with one water being the approach that's done on a more regional level.
Thank you for that distinction. So in order to address this comment, I tailored some language that's really more directed at the one water level. And so we've got option one, which would be no change to the recommendations because there's already a water reuse recommendation included in Chapter 8. And so I've just pasted in here the language that is currently in Chapter 8 that discusses water reuse. And the recommendations are to encourage the legislature to amend the Texas Water Code to add a new chapter to include reuse in the state's administration of water rights. And then there's another recommendation recommending that the Texas Water Development Board and TCEQ financially support research for determining appropriate technology and risk mitigation approaches to significantly expand water reuse with appropriate protections for the public, environment, and worker health. And two, assist the funding and development of incentive programs to advance water reuse projects. So again, this language is currently in Chapter 8, and this is option one, which is no change. Option two would be to add a recommendation to consider studies or funding of one water. And so as you know, typical for Chapter 8, we have a fairly long preamble that discusses mainly the regulatory impediments for reuse. And it references the 2019 Meadow Center report regarding regulatory impediments to implementing one water in Texas. And this paragraph right here, the second paragraph, is actually quoted text from that. And it's mainly focused on the rainwater, I don't see it here, but the rainwater harvesting right here, the yes, rainwater, and then on-site non-potable reuse of black water. Existing regulations make it difficult for developers to construct black water reuse systems. And also the lack of regulations could actually stymie the development of one water projects because developers prefer clear regulatory and permitting paths over case-by-case decision makers by regulators. And so the legislative recommendation could be that the South Central Texas Regional Water Planning Group encourages the legislature to review existing state laws regarding rainwater reuse and black water reuse systems to enable and incentivize implementation of one water projects. And then the other recommendation, this is basically the water reuse recommendation and replacing one water. So recommending that the Texas Water Development Board and TCEQ support the funding for research of expanding one water, and then assisting with the funding and development of incentive programs to advance one water in Texas. And Joanne, do you have any other additions or background on this?
No, I don't really have anything else to add to this.
Thank you.
If there's
Yeah,
any questions, we can.
Lauren, the only thing that I wanted to note here, just to be reflective of the one comment that we did receive during the staff work group, is in this with appropriate protections for the public, the environment, and worker health. One of the issues was said with consideration to water rights. If you recall, and I don't know if that would be covered in the quote public, or if we would want to indicate that, impact on water rights was kind of downstream water rights issue, I believe was mentioned during the staff work group on this.
Sure. If you choose to include this recommendation about one water, we can certainly revise this first sentence, the end of this first sentence, with appropriate protections for the public, environment, and worker health in consideration of, or with respect to water rights, or in consideration of existing water rights.
Something like that. Any comments, any concerns about adding this comment? It would not take away the comment that we currently have on water reuse. It would just add a new comment recognizing this one water concept as something that maybe needs some further study. Are there any concerns about adding that?
Suzanne, I don't have a concern about it. This is Diane, but I do think that when the work has been done for us already, like has been done on the Meadow Center report, it makes sense for us to stay current with what's going on and stop the impediments that may occur. So I think adding this comment about one water would be helpful.
Great. Are there any other comments?
Okay.
Oh, real quick, I'm sorry. This is Jonathan at GBRA. I just wanted to echo what Suzanne had mentioned. Yeah, that was my comment from the work group. Regarding One Water, I think GBRA's, we are a member of One Water in the U.S. Water Alliance, so I think we're pro that. But whatever language we do use, we would appreciate that addition of in respect to the downstream water rights or impact to water rights. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll definitely add that. Okay, moving on to the next one. We received a comment from McCoy WSC, and they requested revisions to the 2021 Regional Water Plan in order to be consistent with their own 2019 5-year conservation plan. And their requested revisions were to increase the population projections, increase the demand projections and supply projections, and their needs and surplus projections. And they provided us a spreadsheet with the exact revisions, and they even split it up by basin, which was very helpful. And so I wanted to provide this proposed response to you all because they're wanting to revise the 2021 plan. However, McCoy WSC currently has sufficient surplus. They're not showing any identified needs. They do believe that their supply projections are very low in comparison to what they actually have in terms of their water permits and so forth. But there are no needs and there are no water management strategies proposed for them other than maybe advanced water conservation to meet those needs. And so the proposed response would be, the South Central Texas Regional Water Planning Group appreciates McCoy WSC's engagement with regional water plan development and recognizes the desire to have data reported consistently among water resources plans. However, given the previous opportunities for involvement in the population and water demand projections and the time and effort constraints associated with revising or amending the plan, the South Central Texas Regional Water Planning Group acknowledges the comment and recommends no changes to the 2021 Regional Water Plan at this time. In order to ensure that population demands and supplies are represented appropriately in future plans, the South Central Texas Regional Water Planning Group encourages McCoy WSC to engage with the next cycle of regional water planning, which will incorporate 2020 census data. I should also note that in March of 2017, we reached out to McCoy WSC to request input regarding the population water demands and existing supplies, and we did not receive any input. In November of 2017, the deadline, the South Central Texas Regional Water Planning Group set a deadline of November 2017 to provide supporting documentation for population and demand revisions. And then in April of 2018, the Texas Water Development Board adopted those population and water demand projections. So the timeline for revising population projections and demands and supplies was back in 2017. Do you all have any comments or proposed revisions on this proposed response?
The only thing that you may want to put in the specific date that they were requested to provide input, and that, you know, a little bit more, just the timeline, I think would be important to state that, because, you know, they were given an opportunity, and so if some of the detail that you just gave, I think would be important, just as facts, not as accusatory or anything, just facts about the process and the timeline for that.
Okay. And I have that already.
Have any concerns about doing that? Okay, thank you.
Okay. Moving on to the next category of comments that we've received. We received 2 comment letters from other state and federal agencies. The Texas State Soil and Water Conservation Board provided a comment, and Texas Parks and Wildlife Department provided a comment. I should also note again that the comment period for other state and federal agencies is still open until mid-August, so we could potentially receive additional comments from other state and federal agencies. So this is a summary of the State Soil and Water Conservation Board comments. They didn't include any recommendations or proposed revisions. It was really mainly focused on the Texas's land area and implementation of best practices and voluntary efforts to encourage education and implementation of land management techniques. The proposed response for this would just be, thank you, we acknowledge the comment. Thoughts? Discussion?
Any comments on that? I think that's fine. Move forward.
Okay. Texas Parks and Wildlife.
Did I hear something? Thank you.
Texas Parks and Wildlife provided a comment letter. It was about 4 pages long. This is a summary of just the general comments that they made. Appreciative of our efforts to follow the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department comments. They commend our strong emphasis on water conservation, reuse, and drought contingency planning, and that there's overall sufficient detail on habitat protection. More general comments, they discussed their concern and just general issues with invasive and exotic species like zebra mussels. They have some concerns about how their water management strategies that are recommended for stream segments identified as ecologically significant. They also discuss the increased groundwater development and their impacts on springs and surface water interactions, and new appropriations and or increased use of Guadalupe River water rights and their impacts to in-stream and freshwater flows. They did include some recommendations, and I've included them here. And we've got 3 slides here of just Texas Parks and Wildlife Department recommendations. And the first is, this is really directed to the entities who are actually implementing the water management strategy projects, or the projects themselves. And they encourage or recommend that the entities coordinate with Texas Parks and Wildlife Department to develop plans to avoid aquatic resources impacts, or in some instances, relocate aquatic resources outside the project area. And the proposed response to that recommendation is, this comment is acknowledged. We could also put in there that each water management strategy states that. It states that at the time of implementation, there will be permitting required. That would likely require coordination with Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. Are there any comments on that?
Any comments? I would suggest that you add what you just said. This comment is acknowledged, and we have referenced permitting requirements with each water management strategy, something like that.
Okay, we can do that. I apologize for that not being added. We just got this comment, I think.
No, that's fine.
Less than a week ago.
No apologies.
The second recommendation is to, they recommend incorporating the recently updated list of state and federal species of greatest conservation need in Chapter 5.2. And that list was updated March 30th. And as a reminder, we performed these water management strategy evaluations during May, June, July, August, September of 2019. And then we submitted the IPP on March 3rd. So this list came out after the IPP. And we had also discussed this at the November meeting about the possibility that this list could come out. And so the proposed language that we would add to Chapter 5.2 is just sort of a blanket statement. I should probably rewind a little bit. So each water management strategy, I think there are 34 water management strategies. Each one has a write-up of the water management strategy evaluation based on yield, environmental, cultural impacts, costs, and so forth. So the environmental evaluations are nestled into every single water management strategy evaluation. And each environmental section is about 16 to 20 pages, because it includes a very long, very involved table of these exact lists. And so it would be quite onerous to go through and revise all of those tables for all of the water management strategies based on something that came out on March 30th after the IPP was submitted. So the proposed language would be added to Chapter 5.2, which is the preamble chapter to all of the water management strategies, which is like 5.2.1 through 5.2. 33. And so the proposed language would be the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department county lists were updated by the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department March 30th, which was after water management strategy evaluations were performed and after the IPP was submitted to the Texas Water Development Board and made available for public review. The evaluations of impacts to threatened, endangered, and species of greatest conservation need included in this regional water plan were based on the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department county lists available at the time of evaluation. Projects would require independent review of impacts to threatened, endangered, and species of greatest conservation need as part of the regulatory permitting for the project. Most updates reflected additions, deletions, or revisions of SGCN species. Updates to state listed species included updated status of black-capped vireo and bald eagle, which are no longer considered endangered or threatened, and updates to freshwater mussels to reflect taxonomic revisions. Do you have any comments on that?
This is Tom Taggart. I guess one comment I would make, would it make sense to just simply add that in the 2026 cycle, we would use the most current update of that list?
Yes, we can definitely do that.
Yeah, I was having a similar thought, Tom, that maybe, again, we could add to Chapter 8 a recommendation that says that we need any adjustments to any state or federal species of greatest conservation need in advance. In other words, we had made a recommendation before about trying to sync up the groundwater processes and modeling and all of that to be informative to the water planning process. Similarly, we may want to say we need to sync up this process of identifying this list in time for it to be incorporated within the water management strategy evaluations that are dictated through the Water Development Board's process. So if the Parks and Wildlife Department want to influence that, they need to have the list to us sooner so that it can be synced up with the Water Development Board's process.
I think that makes sense, and then we can just assure them we'll use the information supplied.
Okay.
Sort of put that onus on them that they have to get it to us in time for the analysis to be done.
Okay. So just to clarify, we'll wordsmith this response to this comment, and we will also wordsmith this paragraph to include in Chapter 5.2, and also include the statement that Tom recommended that we will use the most recent list in the 2026 Regional Water Plan process and the evaluations of water management strategies. And so that's all sort of confined to Chapter 5.2, but then also add a proposed other recommendation to Texas Parks and Wildlife Department to basically sync the schedule of when they update or revise their lists so that it can be informative of the regional water planning process.
Right, because if you say, if we say here, we'll use this list for the 2026 plan, and then they come up with another one, I mean, we got to fix the process. So, yeah, I think that's why the Chapter 8 recommendation would be important about timing.
Okay, we can do that.
You don't want to be the same, get this same comment next year. Next time, not next year. Next time.
Suzanne?
Yes.
A quick comment. To get their information on time, would it be practical to give them a choice of that every quarter that they update, so that way they're not too far behind?
This is Christine Westerman. I just wanted to point out that, well, for one thing, the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department has been updating the lists more frequently lately, like in the last couple of years. But one thing that's kind of a confounding factor is For example, in this comment, we talk about updates to freshwater mussels, and those were based on scientific studies being conducted by universities and so on. So Texas Parks and Wildlife didn't really have any control over the timing on those studies. They just did the updates once the data was available to update the species taxonomy as it affected the lists. So in general, the lists are constantly evolving.
So maybe the concept needs to be that there's a cutoff time. If the list is currently continuing to be evolving, we have to there has to be a recognition that at some point in the planning process there is a cutoff, because you have to be able to evaluate every water management strategy based on the same list. No matter where it comes in the priority of, because water management strategies come in over that period of time in a over periods of time. You would hate to use one list for an early water management strategy that comes in and then have to do another list with another water management strategy that may come in later in the process. I mean, the same formula should be used throughout the entire process, and that process is a long process, as was mentioned. It takes, I guess, a year or so for us to go through all of them. So I think that's what the idea would be. You'd have to have some continuity between I would assume. I mean, I'm just, that's not my expertise, but I would assume everybody that's a sponsor of a water management strategy would want to make sure that they are using consistent evaluations for each strategy.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the way it ended up happening because of our having to have a cutoff date is that we used the lists from July 2019. So all of the water management strategies were consistent in having the same dated lists.
Okay, do you have enough there, Lauren, to do something with, to just kind of make sure that what we have is what we can use based on the cutoff for when that evaluation has to be conducted?
Sure. And I think this should be a topic of conversation for the next cycle as well, because as Stephen mentioned earlier, the environmental reviews of these water management strategies actually occurred earlier in this cycle to be able to inform some of the decision making here. So yeah, I think that might be a topic for conversation for the next cycle as well, to make sure that the cycle or the schedule and the cutoff makes sense.
Okay. Thank you.
Recommendation 3 of 3. I don't have a proposed response for this one yet, but the recommendation was to identify areas where zebra mussels exist in order to prevent spread of zebra mussels via water transfer and negative impacts of invasive exotic species. Do we have a proposed response to this one?
There is information available from Texas Parks and Wildlife Department on where the zebra mussels have been identified. Perhaps a simple figure could be put together to add to address that.
I mean, do you think that we could, if there's a website that remains consistent in terms of the web address and it's just regularly updated, that would probably serve a water user group much better.
Yeah, it would.
Yes, they do have a site that Lauren, I could email you where we go and just check the updates that they have. I'm not sure how frequently. I think it's quarterly maybe, but I can send that to you.
Okay. That would be great. Thank you very much, Melissa. So we can add a statement and add the website. Any ideas of where this would go in terms of which chapter? I mean, it could potentially go in 5.2, which is the evaluation of water management strategies and that preamble of how water management strategies are evaluated in terms of their environmental impacts.
Either there or, yeah, I mean, it seems like that would be the place to put it, kind of where you're talking about how this what the strategy was that you used. So yeah, that would probably be good.
Okay, great. Any other comments on that one before we move on? Any other comments on any of the comments that we've gotten from state and federal agencies? Because we're about to move on to the comments from the Texas Water Development Board. If not, I'll move on. So the Texas Water Development Board, new to this cycle, they provided preliminary draft comments for a review. The preliminary draft comments were a courtesy to regional water planning groups, and they were mainly provided so that we consultants and the regional water planning groups can point the Texas Water Development Board in the direction of where to find information that's already existing in the IPP. In some instances, we got preliminary comments about this evaluation wasn't included in chapter 5, where is it? And then we're like, oh, well, it's actually in chapter 7 or whichever. And so then they were able to remove some of those comments remove some of the draft preliminary comments when they actually provided us the final formal comments from the Texas Water Development Board. And those were provided last month. And so this is a general summary about the comments that we received from the Texas Water Development Board. So they asked us to confirm that all strategies shown as providing water in 2020 will be online and providing water supply by January 5th, 2023. We contacted sponsors for projects that began in 2020 to confirm that their projects were providing supply in 2020, that they would actually be online. And we received responses from some sponsors that confirmed it. There were 2 projects where the implementation decade was revised from 2020 to 2030. And those 2 projects were the SAWS Facilities Expansion CPS Direct Recycling Pipeline and the SAWS Recycled Water Strategy Recycled Water Program. So those were moved back from 2020 to 2030, but there were no impacts to needing to revise water management strategies. That didn't result in any needs. So we're still good on all of that. We also received a comment to include revised water demands and needs for WUGs split with other regions in chapters 2, 4, and 5. The demands that we were showing were based on the WUG primary. There was a filter issue. We've revised that issue, and we've revised chapters 2, 4, and 5, and those filtered down to make revisions to some of the water. There weren't any revisions to water management strategies as a result of that change. There weren't any WUGs that resulted in unmet needs. And that was one of our biggest concerns when we started looking into this. And so we feel comfortable that we can move forward and not have to make significant changes just because of that filtering issue in that database. They also requested that we include major water providers' summary tables. This is a new requirement for this cycle. And the summary tables would be for the existing supplies, needs, and second-tier needs and the management supply factors. They commented that we need to ensure consistency between the plan and DB22. And then also new to this cycle is that we cannot have water management strategies with 0 yield that are recommended. And so we can't put anything into DB22, the database, that shows water conservation for water user groups that aren't actually implementing the advanced water conservation strategies. So I think back in February, we had talked about how for irrigation WUGs that we could just add in their water supply plan in chapter 5.3 a statement, or adding a row to those water supply plans that show advanced water conservation. And then for each decade, 2020 through 2070, we're showing a yield or a demand reduction of 0. And the comment that we got was that we can't put that into chapter 5.3. So we can still recommend that irrigation WUGs follow best management practices and implement conservation, but it can't be an official water management strategy that's recommended for those WUGs if there's zero yield. Does that make sense? Okay, if there aren't any comments about that, basically we're just going to add a narrative to make sure to clarify that conservation is recommended for all water user groups, and that's already in there, but we'll add it more emphasized. Another comment that we got was that we need to provide an explanation for establishing some groundwater supplies equal to demands for some water user groups. And so we're working on providing that explanation to the Texas Water Development Board. So there are a few comments that we're requesting your direction on. And some of these have already been presented to the staff work group 2 weeks ago. And we received some comments and we revised them. And these represent the revisions that we discussed 2 weeks ago in the staff work group. So the first comment, I have it broken out by comment A, is to include documentation of why seawater desalination was not selected as a recommended water management strategy in the plan. And so this proposed text would be added to chapter 5.1. And it says, there's a table of all the potentially feasible water management strategies in this table 5.1-1. So as indicated in that table, the Regional Water Planning Group recommended inclusion of several ASR strategies and brackish groundwater desalination strategies in the 2021 Regional Water Plan. The Regional Water Planning Group included water management strategies. I'm sorry, the planning group includes water management strategies in the Regional Water Plan at the request of WUGs or WUG wholesale water provider sponsors. For the 2021 South Central Texas Regional Water Plan, seawater desalination was not included as a recommended water management strategy because it was not requested for inclusion by WUGs, and the majority of needs in the region can be met by freshwater, groundwater, brackish groundwater, reuse, and conservation water management strategies. There are several seawater desalination facilities currently being planned within Texas. Seawater desalination may become a feasible and cost-effective strategy for Region L in the future. Are there any comments on this?
Any comments? I know that it had been included in previous plans, but it's just not in this one. Okay.
Next comment B is indicate how the planning group considered relevant recommendations from the Drought Preparedness Council that were provided in an August 2019 letter to the planning groups. So the letters to the planning groups included 2 recommendations. The first one was to follow the outline template for Chapter 7, and that had been done. That's done. The second is to develop region-specific model drought contingency plans for water use categories accounting for more than 10% of water demands in any decade. And so this is what we're requesting direction on. For Region L, there are 3 categories that have water demands that are more than 10% of the total demands in any decade. And they are municipal, and that's been done, steam electric, and irrigation. And so for the municipal, we already point the reader to our model drought contingency plans based on groundwater, which is the SAWS drought contingency plan. And then for surface water, the model plan is the GBRA drought contingency plan. So the question is, how do we respond to this comment, or how do we show that we considered this recommendation from the Drought Preparedness Council regarding developing model drought contingency plans for steam electric and irrigation users? And so there are a couple of different options. One option would be do not develop region-specific model drought contingency plan for irrigation and steam electric uses, and just refer to the TCEQ model drought contingency plans. Another option could be to include the Edwards Aquifer Authority critical period management as a model DCP for irrigation and steam electric users. And then of course there are other options that, you know, a hybrid of those that we could consider. And so I'm going to give an example. I put together example language for this second option. So as I mentioned earlier, section 7.5.1 includes the GBRA drought contingency plan as the model DCP for surface water. And then 7.5.2 has the groundwater triggers and responses for the SAWS DCP as the model DCP for groundwater. So we could add this new section, which would be section 7.5.3, which would be recommended triggers and responses for irrigation and steam electric uses. And from there, we could include the EAA critical period management as a model DCP. And so here's what the language would be, could be. And it just provides some background. And it goes on to say, an example of triggers and responses from the Edwards Aquifer Authority critical period / drought management plan is presented in figure 7-6. EAA was selected as a representative example because their critical period management plan applies to municipal, industrial, and irrigation users that are authorized to withdraw more than 3 acre-feet. The critical period management plan includes 5 critical period water stages. The triggers depend on 10-day average spring and index well levels, and the responses are stepwise, mandatory withdrawal reductions. And this figure 7-6 is shown here. And this is just directly from the Edwards Aquifer Authority's website. And it's their EAA critical period management summary. So, do you have any direction and or comments on how to proceed here?
Anybody have any questions or concerns? It seems like a reasonable plan to reference. Anybody have any objections to that?
This is Mitch. I don't have any objections, but I just kind of wonder, since these comments were targeted directly at steam electric and irrigation, I just wonder if the representatives from steam electric and irrigation, how they feel about using this language and saying, hey folks, we recommend you follow the EAA plan.
This is Adam Yablonsky. I represent irrigated agriculture, and I, without getting too much in the weeds, just FYI, these EAA critical period triggers don't always apply directly to irrigation the same way that they do other entities. And without getting into a lot of detail, I'll just kind of leave that there. But I would say that at this stage in our plan process, I would be comfortable with this as sort of a, you know, conceptual framework for how to address this issue, for what that's worth.
Okay.
Adam, do you know, is there any other industry standard that could be referenced pretty easily within the irrigation, agricultural irrigation?
No, not that I can think of. That would be a better model to kind of throw up there. Yeah, sorry, I can't think of anything else that would be better right now.
The other option is to refer to the TCEQ model DCPs just in general.
This is Diane. It seems to me that we're just using this as an example, as we did for the other two. We just gave examples of how the groundwater triggers worked or whatever. It's not like we're assigning this water that we've saved through the EAA critical period plan to irrigation and agriculture. It's just an example, right?
That's exactly right.
That's the way I understand it. We're not endorsing them. We're just saying that they're just a model that potentially someone else could look at as a guideline.
Yeah, and this language sort of clarifies that too, and that it's difficult to create a uniform across the board set of drought triggers and responses. And for entities supplying significant amounts of water to customers with irrigation and steam electric uses, the Regional Water Planning Group suggests reviewing the drought responses and recommendations used by similar entities in the region, and then goes on to talk about the EAA, Critical Period and Drought Management Plan. So what I'm hearing is that what we have here in this proposed language and this proposed addition is acceptable. And if there aren't any other comments, we can move on. Okay. So comment C is provide a general assessment of the progress of the regional water planning area and encouraging cooperation between water user groups for the purpose of achieving economies of scale and otherwise incentivizing strategies that benefit the entire region. So this is a new requirement that is included in a new rule. It just became effective June 28th, and it requires that RWPGs to assess that progress. So it's an assessment of the progress of encouraging cooperation. And the rule actually includes a few more specific evaluations that would need to be included. But this, we received guidance from the Texas Water Development Board that these numbered items down here are not applicable to, do not need to apply for the 2021 Regional Water Plan. So instead, they'll be included in the 2026 Regional Water Plan cycle. So instead, for this 2021 plan, we can just include a general assessment of that, of assessing the progress of the planning area and encouraging cooperation. So here's the proposed language, and this would be a proposed subsection to add to Chapter 11. And Chapter 11 is the implementation in comparison to the previous regional water plan. And so these bullet points are a summary of the various efforts that are ongoing that demonstrate active participation and cooperation among water user groups, and which demonstrates that, well, for the purposes of achieving economies of scale. And ultimately, though, the assessment of like these bullet pointed items demonstrate that the prevailing approach for entities within the South Central Texas Regional Water Planning Area is to coordinate and collaborate. Based on the array of these collaborative projects and partnerships, the Regional Water Planning Area has been successful in encouraging cooperation among WUGs. And I think I also have another sentence that goes in here about how the Regional Water Planning Group will continue to encourage these types of collaborative efforts. Are there any comments on this?
Lauren, where do they, can you demonstrate how the term economies of scale would work here? Because I'm not real clear about that.
In my mind, it's a, and anybody else can jump in too, but I interpreted that to be sort of obtaining cost and operational efficiencies that can ultimately improve the region.
Also, if someone wants to, you know, that, and I think there's some examples of upsizing pipes, or, you know, doing infrastructure that allows for others to tie in so that it provides some those economies of scale that can help people develop more regionalized projects without in a more collaborative way. I think that's what they're trying to get to.
And I guess I could provide a couple specific examples, Suzanne, in relation to what you just, you know, spoke of. And For instance, I mean, the cost of installing pipelines when you're acquiring the easements, you know, if you have multiple pipelines for multiple projects, that's going to be a huge expense, which will be much more cost effective if you have one pipeline serving multiple entities in one easement. And even the installation of pipelines by size, I mean, the cost is in the excavation primarily. The difference between one pipe size and double that pipe size and the actual pipe and valves and you know, piping materials is insignificant in relation to the installation process and excavation. So that's where you get those economies of scale. Same thing in plants, storage tanks, all the way through the system is how you achieve those economies.
Yeah, Tom, thanks for those examples. Appreciate that.
Okay, any comments on this suggestion?
Okay, moving on. Comment D, each water management strategy should include quantitative reporting of reliability, water loss, and impacts to agricultural resources. So what we're planning to do is add to each water management strategy language such as this, just to cover all the bases about the reliability. And in many cases, the water management strategies, especially those for surface water, already include an assessment of reliability. It's just that it wasn't included on some of them, or it wasn't explicitly stated otherwise. And in terms of the agricultural resources, we'll add something along the lines of, the strategy may result in the permanent conversion of approximately X many acres of agricultural land uses to industrial uses. And then in terms of the strategy water loss, we would just include bullet points such as this to summarize the strategy water losses associated with each of these water management strategies. Are there any comments on this?
Any comments? Okay.
Comment E, provide a specific assessment of the potential for ASR projects to meet significant identified needs in the final adopted regional water plan. So the South Central Texas Regional Water Planning Group previously defined the significant, not previously defined, but previously voted and has chosen to define significant water needs as a WUG or use type with an identified need of 10,000 acre feet or greater. And so for the 2021 Regional Plan, those WUGs include the following, and it's NBU, SAWS, San Marcos, Victoria, and then the irrigation and mining use categories. So here's some proposed text for Chapter 5.1, which includes a specific summary of the potential for ASR projects to meet these significant identified water needs in Region L. And so for NBU, we say that NBU is actually has a recommended water management strategy for an ASR project. For SAWS, we say the same thing. For San Marcos, we say a full strategy evaluation of the potential for ASR projects to meet San Marcos's significant identified water needs was not conducted because their needs have been met through a variety of cost-effective water management strategies like conservation, WA-GBRA project phase 1, and so forth. And then given the location and aquifer characteristics in the area, an ASR project could potentially be developed to meet additional needs for San Marcos in the future. For Victoria, we also say that Victoria includes an ASR project that's recommended in the plan. And then a full strategy evaluation of ASR was not conducted for irrigation or mining in the region because implementation of ASR may be considered cost prohibitive compared to the cost of surface water and or groundwater projects. Are there any recommended revisions, comments on this proposed addition?
Any questions?
Okay.
Comments? Okay, looks like we've gotten through that one.
And just wanted to give you all an update on other changes to the IPP. As mentioned earlier, we're going to revise the Advanced Water Conservation Water Management Strategy for clarity to include the specific demand reduction and costs associated with the SAWS Advanced Meter Infrastructure Project. We're also going to revise DB22 to better reflect planned water purchases from willing sellers and willing buyers. And then there will also be various editorial revisions and clarifications. And that concludes the this particular agenda item, unless you have comments.
All right, you got through that. There's a lot there. Anybody have any questions? Now, I think Lauren stated previously that as these comments are made and these changes are made to the various chapters that she's noted here, this will be the track changes version that you talked about, right, Lauren? And that people can see pretty readily where the changes were made, so that as we go through this next round, y'all will be able to just look at this by exception of those things that have been changed. Is that correct, Lauren?
That's correct.
So
this is Adam Yablonsky. If I could jump in real quick and jumping back to what we had talked about earlier with the proposed models for agricultural conservation. I was just happening to think that the EAA also has, and the HCP has some interesting voluntary incentive-based agricultural conservation programs like the VISPO program that I think would also help address the soil and water conservation comments about encouraging voluntary incentive-based conservation practices for private landowners. So that may also be a potential model to put out there as something we're doing in the region to help conserve agricultural water use.
Are you saying that we could refer to that in terms of a response to the State Soil and Water Conservation Board's comment?
That one, and also would it be applicable to when you were going to propose the EAA's slate of critical period reduction, would putting VISPO or a similar sort of voluntary conservation program also apply to that issue as well?
I'm not as familiar with that at this time, but it's something that we could explore adding. We already have proposed language put together for the AA, critical period management. So we would have to pull together some additional language and refer the reader to that plus the EAA VISPO.
yeah, it may just be could be just a line that you add to that section that says there are other incentive-based programs such as the EAA VISPO project that could provide guidance to other irrigators, something generic like that, and then you could just link to that program, which is on their website as well.
That's kind of in line with what I was thinking. I don't think we have to go super into detail, just present it as a conceptual model that somebody may refer to if they're trying to come up with a program of their own.
Yeah, that's a good idea, Adam. Okay. It's been successful, so. Okay, the next item is the presentation on the infrastructure financing survey. I'm just wondering, these Zoom meetings sometimes are difficult for people to get away if you need to just take a minute. We could take about a 5-minute quick break since we are at an agenda stopping point, just in case you need to go get away from the computer for 5 minutes. Can we do that? Maybe everyone could join back about 11:45. Is that okay? I think that'll give us 5 minutes just to stretch our legs real quick, okay?
Great idea. Thanks, Suzanne.
All right. See you back at 11:45. Okay, it looks like it's 11:45. Lauren, are you back with us?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
Okay, so let's proceed with item number 12, presentation of infrastructure financing survey.
Thank you. At this point in time, I will turn it over to Katie Snyder, and she'll be presenting on the infrastructure financing analysis.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. All right, so we'll start with the infrastructure finance, or of course we'll start with the infrastructure financing report because it's agenda item 12. So the infrastructure financing report is completed to assess and quantitatively report how entities will fund the projects that are recommended in the regional water plan. And then we're also going to propose what role the state will have in financing these projects that are recommended. A summary of the infrastructure financing report surveys that we received back will be included in Chapter 9. Chapter 9 includes an introduction about why we conduct the infrastructure financing analysis, the objectives, methods and procedures that we use to collect the information, and then a summary of all the responses that we've received. So again, the point of the infrastructure financing report is to gather information about how sponsors are going to fund their projects that are recommended in the 2021 plan. So we're requesting information on everything to do with the funding that you estimate for planning, design, and permitting versus construction funding. And then we're also asking for what year you expect that funding will be needed. This information helps the Texas Water Development Board tailor the funding so that they can project how much funding they're going to need in the coming years so that we can get approval and have the funds that we need to get these projects implemented. So here is a summary of the infrastructure financing surveys that I've received to date. Out of 12 respondents, we've received information on 36 projects, and we're anticipating state funding somewhere between state funding participation somewhere between 0 and 50%. So this is as of 2 days ago. These are all the surveys I've received. Lauren, if you can advance for me. And if you notice that you're not on here, but you have sent me your infrastructure financing survey, let me know, because these are all the ones I received. So we will continue accepting these. So surveys were sent to 24 WUGs, so we've had responses. We've had 50% of the WUGs that we reached out to respond. The deadline for us to accept these surveys was July 27th, so I think that was Tuesday or Monday. Yeah, and again, these survey responses will be included as a summary in the regional water plan. Any information is helpful, so there's not really any wrong information. And that is all for the infrastructure financing analysis. Oh, I'm sorry. There was one more thing. We were originally going to request you guys' direction. Previously, we were prepared to ask you for direction for the role that the state will play in financing projects, but that we received some additional guidance from the Texas Water Development Board, and the role that the state will play in financing projects has already been answered within the infrastructure financing report itself. So this requirement has already been met by the way of the survey. So no direction is needed. Thank you.
And that concludes the agenda item number 12, the infrastructure financing survey and analysis.
Okay, any other comments on that? I'm assuming that everyone on this call that was asked to give information has done so. so that that could be incorporated in the deliverable. If you haven't and need to, you need to let Lauren know ASAP. I think they cut that off on the 27th. Is that correct?
That's right, but
Yes,
we could potentially continue accepting responses, as I would say, as long as they're received this week, because we have a short period of time to roll this all into the chapter and get them out to you by August 17th.
All right, next is the presentation of implementation survey, chapter 11.
And I'll ask Katie Snyder to give the implementation survey presentation as well.
Yes. So the implementation survey is used to gather information on how projects were implemented. And these are projects that were recommended in the 26 regional water plan. So we're seeing how the projects that were recommended have progressed and been implemented in real life. So the questions that we're asking are things like, has the sponsor taken action into beginning implementation of the project? What level of implementation has been completed? If the project has not been implemented, why not? The estimated yield of the project, because we know things can change between what's recommended in the plan and what ends up happening in real life. The funding that was received to fund the project, whether it comes from the state or other funding avenues, and if it's intended to be included in the 2021 plan if it had not been implemented since the 2016 plan. So a summary of the implementation survey is included in the regional water plan in chapter 11.1. And I believe that's all for the implementation survey. If you guys still have those, please get them to me as soon as possible. We're on the same timeline as the infrastructure financing report. So yes, that is all.
So you haven't received any feedback on that yet, or you have? And
we have received feedback. We didn't include a summary here. We have received about 50% feedback similar to the infrastructure financing report. Out of 24 WUGs, we've gotten 12 responses.
Okay, well, again, people, please get your information in so that we can have as comprehensive of response to this as possible. Okay, next item is the discussion and appropriate action regarding the project prioritization and approach. Again, this is another requirement of the deliverables.
Thank you. And for the project prioritization, I'll turn this over to Junior Legate on our Black and Beach team.
Good noon to everyone. Testing. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Oh, sweet. Last but not least, it is I, Junior Legate. I will be speaking to all of you about project prioritization. Hopefully, or I'm aiming to be efficient and quick with this. I know it's been a long meeting, so we definitely all appreciate your patience with this. This first slide is an overview of what I'll be talking about, which is the purpose of project prioritization, which is ranking recommended projects in the region, its relationship to SWIFT funding, which is a quick one-slide background of SWIFT, how the regional water planning group prioritization rolls into the state prioritization. Then I'll talk about the past two cycles in the 2011 and 2016 regional water plans. This fifth bullet, which is the big ticket item, which is the project prioritization approach for this cycle. We will be requesting guidance on one uniform standard, which I'll explain in a little bit. And then we'll go over one example of this application of the approach in the second to last bullet, and finally close it out with a current status of this process. So the purpose of the project prioritization is to apply the uniform standards provided by the Texas Water Development Board to assess each project in the region. And this is broken up into 5 criteria that is shown on your screen. The first is decade of need for project. Second, project feasibility, project viability, project sustainability, project cost effectiveness. And under each criteria is a set of uniform standards. If you are able to peruse your handout, you will see this huge spreadsheet, or you would have seen the example presentation. And I'll go into more superficial detail on that in a bit. And prioritization will be submitted to the board with the final plan. That means alongside the final plan in October 2020. And this regional prioritization, which is a small part of the state prioritization, will be in the 2022 state water plan. And so this next slide is just a quick overview of what SWIFT is. For many of you, this will be a refresher. For those who are new, there are a lot of information online, but they are actually very succinct in describing it. So kudos to the board. Just go over the main points, which the State Water Implementation Fund for Texas, which is SWIFT, was created by the Texas legislature to provide financial assistance for projects in the state water plan. The eligible projects are recommended water management strategy projects. So all these different water management strategy projects that have some kind of unit cost to them are eligible for funding, but they must be applied, which was discussed a little way earlier in this meeting. The board ultimately reviews all the applications and goes into further detail than what we do as a regional water planning group. Next slide, please. And so this is a quick graphic that I grabbed from their 2-page PDF online with a source on the bottom. I believe it depicts the process pretty well. As you can see, the regional prioritization is only one item, although a very important item, into the state prioritization process. So for example, we send in this list of rankings, but these are further broken out again by representatives of the board, and they would apply these different metrics to it and see from their own scaling, at least as how they explain it to us, about how their population is affected or what recipients get this amount that's applied to their needs and so forth. And so again, it's just one process of this at-large process to get SWIFT funding. As a quick overview, this is what was completed during the last 2 cycles. For the 2011 Region L Regional Water Plan, the 2016 Regional Water Planning Group created a Water Management Strategy Work Group. That isn't a typo. There was a work group created during the 2016 cycle to prioritize the 2011 recommended water management strategy projects. For this work group, they submitted a document called the Summary Report and 2011 Regional Water Plan Prioritization that organized all the projects by maximum average scores, as well as interpretive assumptions for uniform standards application. Their hard work was really appreciated, as this helped, to our understanding, the 2016 cycle, where the consultants were able to adjust all of these different notes, these assumptions, and apply it more seamlessly to the 2016 Regional Water Plan recommended strategies. And that is just a summary on the bottom of what I just explained. The 2016 Regional Water Planning Group as a whole updated the above assumptions, and it was submitted along with the 2016 Regional Water Plan. And so now we come to the project prioritization approach for the 2021 cycle. So as prioritization requirements continue to evolve, we want to establish a structure built from the prior cycles to adequately and efficiently prioritize recommended projects in this and future cycles, with a latitude of flexibility for interpretation. So with this cycle, we developed the project prioritization approach specific to Region L, which is described in these 5 listed items. And so we assess in this first bullet projects listed in the project prioritization sheet generated from the board database. These projects are based, if you're following the mouse, are based on the water management strategies recommended in the 2021 IPP that was submitted earlier this year. As we noted earlier in our presentation, these lists of projects and their data will change once DB22 is finalized, and we are in that process at this moment. Following that, these next two line items are actually done concurrently, where we use the board project prioritization guidance, which was updated in November 2018. And this is actually one of the handout items. If you have it open in your PDF, it is page 115 or bookmark 14A, as well as line item 3, which is the titled Draft 2021 Region L Regional Water Plan Prioritization Approach, which is updated from the 2016 and 2011 cycle. And that is PDF page 119 of bookmark 14B. Oh, thanks. Wow, look at that technology. Sweet. Thank you. And 4, from all this information, as we go through this methodology, we request updated information from the sponsors, as well as provide this draft. So we've gotten a lot of feedback, which we are internally grateful for. We were able to catch errors that I made in the calculations. It's a huge sheet with a lot of different formulas going to different tabs. If you're pretty familiar with data analysis, you know, a lot of things can happen and a lot of eyes help with the process. So if there is anything else that anyone finds from now until, I'm thinking, Lauren, correct me if I'm wrong, by next week, we're hoping to finalize at least the projects that are recommended. We'll be working with the board to finalize data that those projects will depend on.
Yeah, I think what we can do is provide the draft. What we're wanting to guidance on today, and what we're wanting guidance on today is really the prioritization approach, and then we're currently revising the DB22 data. And so once we get the revised DB22 data and we can apply the approved prioritization approach, then we can develop a revised draft of the prioritization. And I think we can provide that revised prioritization with the August 17th chapters that would go on the Google Drive. So generally, let's get the approach approved today, and then we'll provide you the revised draft approach along with all the other chapters August 17th.
Cool, August 17th. Thank you, Lauren. To round this slide off, this will be ultimately submitted with the final plan in October 2020 with all your revisions and finalization of the database. Before we go into the example, we would just like confirmation on this uniform standards that is described here. This is particular to criteria 2, which is project feasibility, and underneath this is uniform standard 2B. If necessary, does the sponsor hold necessary legal rights, water rights, and/or contracts to use water that this project would require? This table on the bottom are the scores that the board guidance dictates for this uniform standard, and to the right are our approach notes if we aren't given sufficient information about the recommended project. During the staff work group, the non-bold regular text was approved by the staff work group. However, we just wanted to get confirmation on the bolded bullet on the bottom that if a permit for part of the plan project firm, yield may receive a top score of 5. So you can either get a 0, 2, 3, 5 for those different parameters. And given that there are different processes through getting a permit, we believe as a group that you may receive, as assessing this uniform standard, you may receive a 5. So if anyone has any objections, please note them. If not, we'll go forward with this.
Yeah, I think the issue here was if you don't have all of your water rights, but you have some of your water rights, does that consider that you have water rights that are necessary to initiate the project? Is that correct, Lauren? That's why we wanted to, it's
That's
not
right.
an all or nothing situation.
That's correct.
Right. So we were giving the benefit of the doubt with the higher score. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, good.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Moving right along. So this is a draft example of our approach implemented to a select number of recommended projects. This example and the full draft sheets in the handout are not final. I repeat, they are not final. They do need your eyes for revisions. It is based on data in the database provided by the board, and there are definitely inconsistencies between what's in the plan and in DB22, and so we're in this process to revise it and thus accurately depict all these projects for project prioritization. So I'll just quickly go over different ones. For example, criteria 1 is decade of need for project. Uniform Standard 1A and 1B are pretty straightforward. What is the decade? The regional water plan shows the project coming online. 2020 would be a score of 10, 2070 would be a score of 0. And as you can see, they correlate with their different decades. The main difference I want to point out is particularly, for example, with this ARWA and GBRA phase 1, they may have been slated for the implementation decade of 2030, but as one of the approach criteria that we developed, we said that for an the funding, sorry, you can go.
Oh yeah, I think this is actually supposed to be a 10 for this ARWA and GBRA phase 1 project. And this is all related to the comment that we got from the Texas Water Development Board about making sure that the projects that we have shown for being implemented in 2020 would actually be online and providing water by January 5th of 2023. And when we looked at it at first, we thought that we were going to have to revise the decade of implementation for the ARWA GBRA phase 1 project from 2020 to 2030. And so that's why this has an 8 here. But since we developed this example, we found out that and confirmed that actually the project will be providing water by 2020. So the decade of implementation for this first one is actually a 10, is actually 2020, and it will actually get a score of 10 for these top 2 rows.
Correct. Sorry about that error. However, it does show one of our approaches was that even if a project were to come online on a later decade, it would be eligible for, or we set that it would be eligible for funding in an earlier decade. For example, if a project was planning to come online or implemented in 2040, they would foreseeably need funding in late 2030. And so that's the distinction of scores. Say, for example, ARWA phase 2, which has a score of 6, but has a higher score of 8 for Uniform Standard 1B. And that's the example I was trying to note above for the ARWA GBRA phase 1, but that will be corrected in the next draft. Next slide, please. This is project feasibility. These were the most gray area type of uniform standards that we asked all of the sponsors to provide information on. It's basically asking how much has feasibility been looked at for permits, water rights, engineering, and sponsor involvement. I won't go into the weeds about this, but you can check the handouts to see how it's scored by both the board guidance as well as how we are interpreted these different criteria.
And I should also point out that especially for these that included so much updated information, in order to respond to these appropriately, we reached out to the water user groups and the sponsors of these projects to determine where they are in the process. Like, do they have a preliminary engineering report completed? If so, then a score of 7, that sort of thing. So we did reach out to sponsors, got their input, and if it's not shown here in this example, we are going to incorporate that information appropriately into the final prioritization. Again, the purpose of all of this is just to give you all an example of the questions and to get consensus on the approach.
Great. Next slide, please. This is criteria 3, project viability, basically asking how viable a water supply does the project provide. Now, this is all a database. For example, standard 3A states it asks, in the decade of project supply comes online, what is the percentage of the WUGs or WUGs needs satisfied by this project, as well as uniform standard 3B, which asks about the final decade of the planning period, which is 2070. And these are based on the numbers of WUG recipients and just their needs and the supply that would be provided by the projects on the left. And we can move on to the next slide. Thank you. This was simpler questions asked. These are still under criteria 3, project viability, uniform standard 3C, which is this project the only economically feasible source of new supply for the WUG other than conservation? No for 0, yes is a 5. And then uniform standard 3D, does this project serve multiple WUGs? This got a bit of discussion on our staff work group meeting. However, we realized and talked about how the board guidance in particular identified that even if, say, a wholesale water provider that in and itself provides water to multiple entities as its own business and whatnot, if it's not shown in the database that they are serving that, then they must receive a score of 0. So if there's in any way that the sponsors want to change that, please let us know. But by the board rules, they must receive a score of 0 for this. Cool, moving on. Project criteria for project sustainability. How sustainable is the project? Over the uniform standard 4A, over what period of time is this project expected to provide water, regardless of the planning period? Basically meaning, is it going to extend past 2070? Most, if not all, got a score of 10, unless it was drought management was not in here. They're all projects that have some kind of infrastructure. So if some project stopped in the middle, that's how it would receive a score of 5. Uniform standard 4B, does the volume of water supplied by the project change over the regional water planning period? Pretty straightforward, decreases equals 0, no change equals 3, and increases equal 5. The only kicker to this uniform standard by the board guidance is that it can't increase in volume supply by the phase of a project. So we kept that in mind when assessing these different projects. Okay, moving on. And last but not least, criteria 5, which is project cost effectiveness. What is the expected unit cost of water supplied by this project compared to the median unit cost of all other recommended projects in the region's current regional water plan? These are based on unit costs of projects that have a non-zero capital cost. And if you're able to read it or using your handout, you can see these different criteria. Say, for example, if it's 200% or greater than the median cost, unit cost, which was about $1,014 per acre foot, then it would get a score of 0. If it was less than that, then it would increase its score each time. And this last slide, if you kind of missed it, is ranking the scores to your right. Cool. Thank you, Lauren. And we'll close it off on the status of the project prioritization status. Some projects are still being revised. We would like that information as soon as possible, so please review the handouts. The approach, we would like your approval on that. As you can see in the green, follow the draft 2021 South Central Texas Region L Regional Water Plan Prioritization Approach, which was developed from the previous cycles. Or if you can help assist us in modifying this approach.
So are there any objections to the approach that's been put before you here today? I know it's a lot of information. but it's pretty consistent with some minor tweaks as to what we've done previously. A little bit of refinement, but didn't seem like there was too much change. But I know for those that are new to the process, it's it's a lot of data that goes into this prioritization. Any comments, any objections to the approach that was identified here today? Okay, I'm not hearing any, and I'm not seeing anything. So please, I know this format is very difficult to get, participation, but it's kind of important that we give them this direction today because they need to continue with finalizing this. So unless objections are shared here right now, they're going to go forward with the calculations as they presented them.
Thanks, Suzanne. That concludes the this agenda item.
Okay. All right. Next is, I think Caitlin's going to do a quick presentation on regional liaisons. This issue has actually been discussed quite a bit in our Interregional Planning Council. So I wanted for Caitlin to talk a little bit about this. I know it's sort of towards the end of the planning process for this round, but it'll be important as we get ready for the next cycle. Go ahead, Caitlin.
Thank you, and thank you, Black and Beach team. That was great. As Suzanne said, we're not going to be seeking nominations at this meeting. We will be seeking them in November, at the November 5th meeting. We're seeking nominations for other positions as well. This is just to talk a little bit about what is going to be expected from these roles. So the Texas Administrative Code requires that each regional water planning group have a liaison for each adjacent region. If we do not have members to fill each of these positions, this item will become a standing item for each planning group meeting, and maybe something we'll have to talk about each planning group meeting. These are our current liaisons to Region L. They often come to every single one of our planning group meetings and listen in, and sometimes they give us really good advice on what they're doing in their region. Here are all of the regions that are adjacent to ours. As you can see, we have quite a lot. I'll list them in the next slide. We have Region K, Region M, Region J, Region N, and Region P. We need to fill all of these positions. John Byram has taken over the Region N position from Con Mims, and he has not been officially confirmed by the planning group. Some things that we would like from liaisons are to serve as non-voting members of the region you are assigned to and attend their quarterly meetings, to create active discussion with that region you are assigned to on Region L activities that may affect that region, try and avoid conflicts, and report on matters from the region you are assigned to that may affect Region L at our planning group meetings. And these would only be expected to be very short, very brief reports. Are there any questions on this?
So basically, this is, this is a role that we really haven't been maybe as diligent as filling over the last cycle. This is really the opportunity to be able to have some of that interregional coordination. If something's being said at another region, if there is a project that's being planned that either shares water and or has an impact from region to region, it would be important for all of us to know. I do know that as part of the work that the consultant does, they have to sort of look at those interregional relationships, but this is a requirement of the planning process. So we would encourage any of you that may have an interest in serving in one of these liaison roles to start thinking about that, looking at the map, seeing if there is someone from our planning group that would be interested in serving as a liaison to one of the adjacent planning groups. You would be informed of their meetings and would be able to listen in on their deliberations and then report back to us. Any questions or comments about this? We'll be bringing this up in later meeting, but just wanted to alert y'all today about it. Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Caitlin. You'll see this on future agendas. Next, Caitlin's got a quick, it's sort of administrative issue that she needs to bring forward, discussion appropriate action regarding planning members' bylaw violations. This is a requirement that is in our bylaws that she's going to report on.
Thank you. So 2 members have received notice of their violation of the regional bylaws in regards to absenteeism. They have taken steps to correct this with me, and so now I just want to provide a brief refresher on the regional absentee policy.
You may want to talk just a little bit louder, Caitlin. You're kind of not coming through as loud.
Sorry. Is this better?
A little bit, yeah.
I'll just take my mic out. Is this better?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So, according to the bylaws, members who miss 3 consecutive planning group meetings, or at least 1/2 of all meetings in the preceding 12 months, are eligible for removal from membership. All this is to say, please do your best to let me know if you are unable to attend a meeting, or let me know that an alternate will be representing you. I really understand that it's difficult sometimes, especially because we're dealing with all these new situations and things are changing so quickly. But since we're wrapping up our cycle, it's particularly important right now. So just something to keep in mind. Are there any questions on this?
And again, we're just required to tell everybody, tell the planning group when we've had violations. So we're not going to specifically note who the violations were, but we're handling it, and we're moving forward with the requirements as outlined in the bylaws. But attendance is critical. As you can see, there's a lot of detail information that is shared, and you can't really come in after the fact and try to catch up. It's just too much information to do that. Okay, so that's just a requirement we wanted y'all to be aware of. All right, thank you, Caitlin. So next is possible agenda items for the next Regional meeting, which will be a pretty critical one. You want to go through this, Caitlin?
Sure. So at the next regional meeting, we will be adopting the final draft of the 2021 Regional Water Plan. We will be doing discussion and appropriate action for the project prioritization and authorizing the San Antonio River Authority to submit that, as well as the same thing for the 2021 Regional Water Plan. So it's a real big one. Are there any other items that we would like to have on the agenda?
Now, Caitlin, do a refresher. I know we talked about this at the beginning of this meeting as to what's going to happen between now and then regarding all of the draft chapters, the track changes, the requirements for people that are interested in watching that. All of it, just remind everybody again about between now and the August drop dead date, kind of what they need to do to prepare for September 3rd.
Right. So Lauren will be sending out all of the drafts of this final regional water plan. I will be sending this out to y'all in emails. You will get the PDFs of the various chapters and volumes, and there will also be a Google form that you can fill out with your comments. All I ask is that you put the chapter and the section in that Google form so we know where to find your comment. This will also be in the Google Drive, which each of y'all can access. I will be sending out a PDF with specific instructions on how to do that. You don't have to use it. You can just email everything directly to me and I will put it in for you, but you have access to that Google Drive at all times.
And what's the deadline, Caitlin?
The deadline for providing comments to us is August 24th.
Thank you, Lauren.
August 24th. So you're going to be getting things here. Now those will come in incrementally, right, Lauren? The chapters?
Possibly. I think in general, let's just say everything will be available for you all to review by August 17th.
Okay.
If we can get chapters uploaded quicker, then we will.
Okay. So everything will be out there by August the 17th, and you have to have your comments back by August the 24th. So I know it's a quick turnaround, but you've seen a lot of what they're doing through today's presentations as to areas that they're going to be modifying. You know, this is the way it is in every cycle. When we get towards the end here, there's a lot of, you know, administrative work that needs to be done to finalize the plan. So anything else on items for future regional meeting? All right, so now we're moving into the public comment at the end of the meeting. Caitlin, do you have any public comment? That is anybody that's submitted anything for public comment?
Yes, I have one public written comment. It is by Rachel Swinsky, and I'm going to read it. In the past public comments, I have advocated for Region L to make information about the water planning process in meetings available on the Region L website, available in a way that interested persons could locate such information. In the past, I have commented that information about meetings listed in public notices is now prominent, but other information remains obscured. For example, the option for the timeline on the home links sheet submit a web link to the website. To information for the previous cycles that started in 2011. In response to my comments, I have sometimes received responses from staff explaining how to locate current information. The fact that information is somewhere on the website in places so obscure that only a resident such as myself, who is more familiar with the process than 99.99% of my peers, can eventually locate such information with difficulty, does not show transparency and an attitude of openness to public input, even though you do welcome public comment. Again, I urge you make such information available in such a method that such residents who are not familiar with the process but want to participate have reasonable opportunity to do so. I appreciate your consideration in this matter. There are no other public comments.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that comment from Rachel. I know that it's a lot of information, and we do need to try to make improvements where we can. So I appreciate that, and I'm sure Caitlin will take that under advisement to see how we can improve the ability to locate, access information on our website. Okay, any other comments from anybody else before we adjourn? Anybody from the planning group itself have any comments, concerns?
So this is Mitch, and I'd just like to follow up on that most recent thing. I think that if we're going to ask Caitlin to make some effort at making information more easily findable, maybe we could add that to the agenda of the next meeting, is just for her to report back, say, this is what we suggest, or this is what we did.
Okay. Caitlin, would you be prepared to do anything that we may modify the location of information on our website?
Absolutely.
And I also think it would be important part of that, and maybe Elizabeth could assist. You know, sometimes the Water Development Board also has a pretty has a lot of information on their website relative to regional planning, and it may be good to not only look at our direct website but also theirs for finding information, and maybe somehow cross-referencing both of them, you know, together. But I've learned, based on this Interregional Planning Council, we're learning a lot about the information that's out there on the Water Development Board website, and this issue of trying to make this information available and indexed and make it easy for people to find. It's a struggle that even the state is looking at as well, because the information is voluminous. I mean, there's just so much. So this is a constant challenge that we're all experiencing, and I think it's becoming more relevant during these times, because people are it's harder to engage in these online meetings, and people are looking for reference documents. So I think it's timely, and we'll do what we can next meeting to address it. Okay, anything else? All right, if we're not hearing anything else, I think that's it. My page ended here. There's nothing else, right, Caitlin? I can't find the second page of the agenda.
That's correct.
Is that it?
Yes.
Okay. All right, then it's 12:30 and we are adjourned. Please look for the information coming your way to do your reviews of the document. Thank y'all so much for your time. Have a
Thank
nice
you,
day.
everybody.
Stay safe.
Thank you.
Great job, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.